Grace and peace, everyone. Today's reading is from If I Ran the Zoo by Dr. Seuss. I went and reread this book recently because it's been some controversy. It came up in the news. 6 books by Dr. Seuss, or Seuss technically, were picked out by his estate as not going to be published anymore because they contained offensive depictions in them. And If I Ruled the Zoo stuck out to me because that one's kind of important to me. That's where nerds come from. The phrase nerd, as well as a number of other nonsense words, were started in this Dr. Seuss book. And so I'm like, wow, for that to be removed. I didn't remember anything bad from it, but I wasn't sure if I even was read it as a child, so I wanted to read through it. I see so many people on both sides of this argument just jumping to conclusions. It's kind of like when I did my review on Cuties, right? Like, there were people that were saying, we can't possibly this is cancel culture. We can't possibly not publish something from Dr. Seuss because it's Dr. Seuss, and obviously he's written some really good things, so he can't write anything bad. Which that doesn't line up. That can't be reality. And then other people saying, somebody says it's offensive, therefore it must be offensive, so don't even question it, because if anyone's hurt, then it's hurtful, and then it's good that it got depublished. And besides, those people are wrong, so the opposite of wrong must be right. And I just don't think that's necessarily true either. So I thought, hey, why don't we read it, right? Like let's just see. And here's the thing: there are some authentically really awful depictions in this book. Here and here. And so it's probably a good thing that this isn't being published and sold for children any longer. Because those things are hurtful, and they hurt people who see them, who are of those races that are being unfairly depicted, and they also hurt people like me who start thinking that kind of stuff's okay. But the text itself, and I think Dr. Seuss really deserves some credit, because while he came out of an era of World War II, which involved a ton of anti-Japanese sentiment, because we didn't like fascists. Dr. Seuss dislikes fascists. He is Antifa. He came out of that and really produced some magnum opuses of anti-racism. I think the Butter Battle book is a fantastic image of like what's wrong with tribalism and how silly it is. And of course, the Sneetches book, which is just brilliant and gives to a child's ability to understand a sense of like what racism is like, and why the answer to racism isn't just let's stop talking about it, or why won't those people who are recipients of persecution just change? You know, why isn't just acting white an option? Because it's not. And the Sneetches will tell you why it's not. And so he's made this really great stuff, and then he's also done this. So what's he thinking? What's the book? Okay, so independent. Should we show it to our children? No, probably not. But we're adults. What's going on? What's the book about? Well, it starts with a young boy named Gerald McGrew. And he says to the zookeeper, you know, you've got a pretty good zoo, but I could do better. So we've got kind of 2 characters here, both of whom are flawed. We've got a zookeeper who's doing okay, and we've got a kid who is pretty presumptuous. You can just see his depiction. Like, he's kind of wide-eyed and tiny, and he thinks he can do a better job than the zookeeper. And how is he going to do a better job? Well, and let me read it to you. He says, If you want to catch beasts you don't see every day, you've got to go places quite out of the way. You've got to go places no others can get to. You've got to get cold, and you've got to get wet. 2, up past the North Pole where the frozen winds squeal, and I'll go and hunt in my Skiegelmobile. So he says, like, the answer to your boring zoo problems, the answer to your bland food, the answer to your lack of excitement in your life is you've got to engage more places. You've got to travel a bit. You've got to expose yourself to different kinds of people and different kinds of animals and different kinds of ideas. What this zoo needs is multi-ethnicity, which is, I mean, brilliant. It's a brilliant message. And it was absolutely, this book came out in 1950. It was a message for its time. Seuss and Geisel, if there was anything he really hated, it was isolationism. That's what he railed against within America most passionately. This sense that, like, oh yeah, we'll just be fine over here, and whatever happens in the world, those are the world's problems. So he's saying with If I Ran the Zoo, hey, you know what would be better is, like, if we engaged more of the world, which is great, except that Gerald's idea of how he's going to engage the whole world is deeply flawed. And it's flawed within the narrative. Like, Gerald is a flawed character in the book. There's nothing about the book that makes you think, Gerald is a Christ figure or Gerald is right. This is what Gerald says. For those that are ugly and vicious and mean, I'll build a bad animal catching machine. It's rather expensive to build such a kit, but with it a hunter can never get bit. So what he's going to do is he's going to travel to all these exotic lands, and there he's going to take what he wants by force and without permission. Well, what does that sound like? All of a sudden, that doesn't sound so much like the harmonious multi-ethnic community that we hope for. That sounds like cultural appropriation. I'm going to go to your lands, and I'm going to take what I want and claim it for myself and put it in my zoo. And that gets so bad in this book, it gets to the point that we get the most offensive possible depiction that we see in the book. And that's this one. I'll capture them fat, and I'll capture them scrawny. I'll capture a scragglefoot mulligatawny, a high-stepping animal fast as the wind from the blistering sands of the desert of Zinde. This beast is the beast that the brave chieftains ride when they want to go fast and find some place to hide. A mulligatawny is fine for my zoo, and so is a chieftain. I'll bring one back too. So Gerald, going off to far-off lands and places, capturing what he wants, taking it back for a business enterprise for himself, a white person in the United States. And among those things that I'm going to take and appropriate for myself is a human being, a chieftain, from this stereotypical version of India. Mulligatawny is an Indian type of soup. And so there's this animal from the desert of Zinde, and I'm taking that, and I'll also take the human, presumably to put him in a cage next to the animals. And it's not an okay depiction, right? Like for Gerald to be imagining that within universe in an adult conversation, we can engage that and we can pay attention to how that is. But yeah, I see how, like, if I were sitting on the Seuss estate and I were asking the question, hey, how do we make sure to future-proof Seuss? And how do we make sure that the guy who wrote brilliant books about anti-racism isn't known for, like, justifying slavery? Well, let's take this book off the shelves. Like, let's just not put any emphasis on that for a while yet. Yeah, that's an understandable choice to make. But for adults, if we're not spoon-feeding it to children who might not have the ability to dissect and to sort the good from the bad, For adults, it's a brilliant conversation piece about the way racial awareness occurs in a sine curve, that over time we go from a place of like open racial hatred, right? Where I say my race is the best and it is superior and no races have anything worthwhile to offer. In fact, I would like it if those other races got destroyed, to a place first of like racial neutrality, right? Which says like, well, I like my race, you like your race. Let's just stay apart. Then we get to a place of like color blindness, where we start to say, well, race doesn't matter, and racial oppression doesn't matter, and I can take all the benefits from other places, but I don't have to like pay any of the costs. I'm just going to take what I want. And if anybody complains about it, they just shouldn't pay so much attention to race. How do you even know I'm white, right? And then we start to pay attention again, and we start to go up on the curve, and we start to say, hey, people who are of different races have something different to offer. They have a different perspective because of their race, and that's not a reason to hate them. That's a reason to value them. That's more colors in the rainbow. And then we get to a place of intersectionality. Hey, there's more things to pay attention to than just race. There are mixed race people, and there's all these complexities to this issue. And so very often, the things that we did that were progressive at one time become regressive. Very often, when we make steps, we make 2 steps forward and 1 step back. Very often, we are like Gerald McGrew, who wants to make the world a more diverse place. After all, animals, lions and tigers, they come from Africa and India, respectively. The zoo is a place that is a global place. It benefits from worldwide diversity. And the best zoo is the most diverse zoo. And then trying to do that, we step on a whole nother bed of eggs. We just make another big mess, because every time we try to do something, we do something new wrong, and we discover something new to learn. And man, if there is any person I can think of, any author who ought to be an icon of lifelong learning, boy, it ought to be Dr. Seuss.